Welcome back. The UK government should support the government of Gibraltar in enforcing fisheries protection legislation and also instruct the Royal Navy to defend territorial waters and their resources. This was the recommendation made by the UK Overseas Territories Conservation Forum when giving evidence to the House of Commons Environmental Audit Committee. A report on sustainability in the UK Overseas Territories by the committee was published this week.
The Environmental Audit Committee is appointed by the House of Commons to consider to what extent the government's policies and programmes contribute to environmental protection and sustainable development. Last year, the UK published its first white paper on overseas territories since 1999, and the committee reported back on its findings regarding sustainability in these territories. Of the 188-page report, a large percentage is dedicated to the written and oral evidence provided by witnesses, comprising mostly of environmental experts and representatives of NGOs. Among them is the UK Overseas Territories Conservation Forum, a charity promoting the conservation of biodiversity, ecosystems, and the sustainability of OTs and their local communities. The forum, which was also involved in the preparation of a report for the government of Gibraltar on fisheries, dedicates a significant amount of its submissions to the fishing dispute. Among the criticisms of its lack of protection of Gibraltar's waters, the forum highlights the UK's failure to subscribe the territory to international conventions and initiatives, and therefore it falls between the slats. It says there's a perception within Gibraltar, both in government circles and among the general population, that the UK government doesn't do enough to protect them from Spain, and preference is given to not upsetting the Spanish government at the expense of Gibraltar's interests. The forum suggests that the UK government reviews its internal processes and comes up with a specific strategy involving a cross-departmental task force to deal with primarily environmental objectives, but also to decide what action is taken in respect of Spanish incursions. The forum believes the UK failed in its obligation to Gibraltar by allowing Spain to designate British Gibraltar territorial waters as part of its own special area of conservation under the Habitats Directive, which was then accepted by the European Commission. The body recommends that the UK supports Gibraltar by enforcing fisheries protection and resists Spanish support for illegal activities. It says the Royal Navy should be instructed to support Gibraltar in the defence of territorial waters and their resources. The EAC's report also contains a reply to the Conservation Forum by Minister for Europe David Lidington, who rejects the forum's criticisms and defends the UK's handling of incursions into BGTW. Mr. Lidington says the Royal Navy defended British sovereignty by challenging all incursions by Spanish state vessels, but the UK government wouldn't escalate the situation, and all differences with Spain should be resolved diplomatically. The EAC conclusions themselves don't mention Gibraltar specifically, but make broad criticisms of the UK's relationships with OTs from an environmental perspective, saying it's failed to negotiate the extension of the Convention for Biological Diversity to the OTs. It says the government is unclear of its responsibilities and describes the 2012 White Paper as a failed opportunity. In a statement, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office says it welcomes the committee's report, will carefully consider its findings and recommendations, and respond in due course.
The outgoing president of the European Union has described the principle of freedom of movement as a fundamental one to Europe and one of the core elements which distinguishes the Union. José Barroso was delivering his speech during the official handover of the presidency to Greece in Strasbourg. He said the European Commission, as the guardian of treaties, would uphold the principle of freedom of movement as it was an historic achievement and a measure of the progress of civilization.
To be clear about free movement, the European Commission, as the guardian of the treaties, will uphold this principle. It is an historic achievement, a civilization progress, a true acquis of freedom, democracy and the rule of law. It cannot come as a surprise to anybody that the principle of free movement exists and that it is applicable throughout the Union without discriminations, because we don't want in Europe citizens of first class and citizens of second class. It is not a freedom without rules. It is not a freedom without rules. Free movement is subject to European law that has also been jointly decided by the Member States in the Council and by this Parliament. These rules offer guarantees to citizens, and they also offer possibilities to Member States to deal with abuses.
Following a period of consultation, the government is taking the next step towards what they're describing as a landmark piece of equality legislation. The bill will formally recognise civil partnerships between two people signing an official register, regardless of gender or sexual orientation. It's expected to be published next week. Government ministers are said to be entirely united on the issue, and so it appears inevitable it will be transposed into law in Parliament very soon. Once this happens, civil partners will enjoy the same rights as married partners have traditionally enjoyed in areas such as benefits relating to tax, pension and property rights. Our reporter, Jonathan Scott, spoke to Equality Minister Minister Sacramento.
This is a piece of legislation that we've been working on over the past year in consultation with, in particular, Equality Rights Group. We were able to be at the stage where we could issue the command paper just before Christmas. The consultation period is now up, so we will now progress to issue this as a bill, and we will then take it before Parliament at the next available opportunity.
You've described this as a landmark piece of legislation. Why so?
Well, I think it is quite a landmark piece of legislation because it's the first time that in Gibraltar we will be officially recognising relationships between same-sex couples. Even though this legislation also extends to heterosexual couples, it means that there is the opportunity for people of the same sex to register their relationship. The civil partnership.
Well, I was going to say there's a very strong Roman Catholic community in Gibraltar. Does this challenge the popular idea that marriage should be between a man and a woman?
This isn't a marriage. What this legislation is about is the registration of a civil partnership between a couple.
For somebody who's listening and is not fully aware of the differences, why civil partnership and not marriage?
The manifesto commitment that we had was that we would legislate in order to recognise civil partnerships. So in law, what is being recognised will be a civil partnership between either a man or a woman or people of the same sex.
Not a very strong response to this last stage of the consultation. Do you think that means that this isn't really an issue for the community, or that you've got the process and the legislation right?
We've had one response to the command paper. What we've done is, because we've engaged groups throughout the period, then the groups that are representative of the parties affected have pretty much been working so closely with us that we've taken on board what they've been saying. Now, I think that this is a piece of legislation that we've been saying over the last year and a half that has been in the pipeline. It hasn't caught anyone by surprise, I don't think. And I don't think that we should read much into the fact that we've had little response to the consultation period, and I don't think that there will be any great objections to this piece of legislation.
2013 saw a significant drop in the number of complaints against the Royal Gibraltar Police compared with the previous year. It's one of the statistics highlighted in the annual report of the Police Complaints Board. There were a total of 23 complaints in 2013 as opposed to 36 in 2012. The board has attributed the decrease to rising standards of professional police behaviour.
Obviously, it's encouraging for the RGP that the numbers are sharply down from, I think it was 36 last year to 23 this year, so that's 13 complaints down. We might wonder why that's the case. I assume, and we assume, that it's because the police obviously is more proactive, is more effective, and that people have got more confidence in the police. I wouldn't like to think it's the other way around, that they feel that we are not obviously competent enough in investigating, therefore they give up on us. I believe that all investigations are done thoroughly, and that at the end of the day we are trying to serve the public that complains about the police.
Well, the report is generally quite positive, but you do highlight what you describe as instances of alleged rudeness by police officers, which are quite frequent, you say.
It's not that it's quite frequent, it's something which has obviously stood out. You must remember that most of these issues of rudeness or abrasive behaviour or abrasive nature in police officers stem from situations at the frontier during the height of the queues being formed there in the heat of the summer. And you know what tempers can be like when there's thousands of people trying to get across and there's 2 police officers trying to man the situation. There are members of the public who can be abrasive themselves, and therefore the police officer responds. I'm not condoning that, and it's a valid complaint by a member of the public. Sometimes very difficult to substantiate and to rule in favour, because a member of the public can complain about an abusive or rude police officer, but it's very difficult to prove. It's sometimes there but not proven because there's no recording as such.
Yes, and in fact you also mentioned in the report that there may be cases when the actual complaints are being vindictive or maybe spurious, so it must be hard to adjudicate that.
It's very difficult to adjudicate all that. The underlying current is there, but it's very difficult to prove. That's why there's only one substantiated complaint this year so far. In the cases of alleged rudeness, we do get in touch with the line managers and ask them to talk to the officers in question, even though it hasn't been proven, so that obviously it doesn't recur. Remember, a police officer in a uniform has to be obviously respected by the public at large and lend himself to that or herself to that.
You were mentioning that many of the complaints have come from situations down at the border. Of course, we've had a very busy time down there, a very hectic last few months. So I suppose from that point of view, it's quite understandable that people should be on edge and should complain against the police.
Understandable, but not acceptable, right? A police officer, as you will probably agree with, has to hold himself correctly all the time and act accordingly, you know, and remember that he's always got a uniform on. But as you say, it's understandable.
On a positive note, the neighbouring policing units that have been set up by the Commissioner have been largely welcomed, haven't they?
We've noticed over the last 2 years since the new commissioners come on with the establishment of the neighbourhood policing units that the public at large seems to be happier with the fact that there's more police available in the vicinities. The fact that the policing units are working with the tenants associations, with the youth clubs, etc. People are voicing concerns in vicinities, in neighbourhoods, and therefore they're working together with the police and vice versa. This has added to the fact that the police are now seen in a better light by the public at large, and that's our perception.
Also this week, the GHA dealt with 2 suspected cases of swine flu at St Bernard's Hospital. Gib Telecom bought the Haven building at John Mackintosh Square for £5.8 million, and Word of Mouth were once again awarded the organisation of Calentita for the next 3 years. For the rest of this week's news, you can head over to our website, gbc.gi/news. And don't forget to tune in to Radio Gibraltar and GBC Television throughout the week for the very latest local news. You can also follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.